Snow fell in heavy, whispering sheets, blanketing the quiet street in white. The kind of snow that silences the world, except for the desperate knocking at Daniel's door. It was almost midnight. The storm had been raging for hours, and his 5-year-old daughter, Lily, had just fallen asleep by the fire. He wasn't expecting anyone. Not tonight, not ever. But the knock came again, louder this time, urgent. When he opened the door, what he saw changed everything. Standing there, shivering and pale, was a woman in a navy coat dusted with snow. And he had no idea that the stranger on his porch was his boss. Daniel had always kept to himself since his wife passed 3 winters ago. Life as a single dad in a small mountain town wasn't easy. He worked as a carpenter at a furniture company in the city, doing extra shifts just to keep the heat on for Lily. He didn't complain. His little girl was his reason for everything. Every night, he'd read her a story by the fire, her tiny hand curled around his arm, and promise her that things would get better. He just didn't know when. That night, the power had flickered out hours ago, and the wind howled against the wooden frame of the house. Daniel was stirring soup on the old stove when that knock came. Sharp, unexpected, and out of place in their quiet isolation. When he opened the door, the woman could barely speak. I'm sorry. My car skidded off the road. I didn't know where else to go. Her lips were blue, her hands trembling. Daniel quickly ushered her inside without hesitation. Come in. You're freezing. She nodded weakly, her breath visible in the cold air. As she stepped closer to the fire, light revealed her features. Delicate but strong, eyes that carried exhaustion and something familiar, though Daniel couldn't place it. He gave her a blanket and poured her some soup. Lily stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. Daddy, who's that? This nice lady got stuck in the snow, sweetheart. We're helping her warm up? The woman smiled faintly. Thank you. Both of you. Her name was Grace. She said she was traveling to the city for a work trip when the storm forced her off the highway. Daniel didn't ask for details. She looked too tired to talk. All he knew was that he couldn't let her go back out there. They talked softly while Lily colored in her book beside them. Grace asked about the little girl's drawings, her school, her favorite story. She listened, really listened. And something about the way she looked at Daniel, the quiet way she smiled, stirred something he hadn't felt in years. Hours passed, and the storm only grew worse. Grace insisted she'd sleep on the couch, but Daniel offered her his room. She refused gently, but her gratitude was clear. That night, as Daniel checked the windows and added more wood to the fire, he found himself wondering about her. Who she really was, where she came from, and why she looked like she carried the weight of the world. The morning light crept slowly across the frost-covered glass. The storm had finally passed. Grace stood by the window, her phone finally catching a weak signal. Daniel poured coffee, his eyes lingering on her. There was something refined in her posture, a quiet authority that didn't fit the image of a lost traveler. "Thank you for saving me last night," she said softly. "If you hadn't opened the door, I don't know what would have happened." He shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, her gaze meeting his. "Not everyone would." Just then her phone rang. She stepped aside to answer, her voice shifting, calm, professional, commanding. It was a tone Daniel recognized but couldn't place. When she hung up, her expression was mixed. Relief, guilt, something else. "You work at Timberline Furniture, right?" she asked carefully. Daniel froze mid-sip. "Yeah, how do you know that?" She hesitated. "Because I'm Grace Turner, the new CEO." The mug slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The woman he'd taken in, the one he'd offered his home and warmth to, was the very person who had recently announced layoffs at the company, the reason Daniel had been terrified of losing his job right before Christmas. "I didn't mean to deceive you," she said quickly. "I didn't recognize you until I saw the photo on the shelf. Your work uniform. I wanted to tell you, but..." Her voice faltered. "You were kind when you didn't have to be. I didn't want that to change." Daniel's heart pounded. He wasn't angry, just stunned. This woman, the one whose signature determined his paycheck, had stood helpless on his porch like anyone else. No titles, no power, just human vulnerability. "I don't treat people differently," he said quietly, sweeping the broken pieces aside. "A storm doesn't care who you are." Grace looked at him then. Really looked. Something softened in her eyes. For years, she'd lived in boardrooms, making decisions that affected hundreds, but she'd never truly seen the lives behind them. Until now, they spent the rest of the morning talking. Not as boss and employee, but as two people who'd both lost something. Daniel shared stories of Lily's laughter keeping him alive after his wife's passing. Grace admitted she'd thrown herself into work after a divorce she never healed from. Two broken souls, thawing beside a dying fire. By the time her car was towed and the roads cleared, leaving felt harder than either expected. Grace knelt to hug Lily goodbye. "You take care of your dad, okay?" "I always do," Lily said with a grin that melted Grace's heart. As she turned to Daniel, she hesitated. "You reminded me what kindness really looks like." "Maybe I've been leading all wrong," he smiled faintly. "Maybe we both needed a snowstorm to remember what matters." Weeks later, back at work, Daniel was called into the office. He feared the worst, until Grace smiled across the desk. "I wanted to let you know we're expanding the community program," she said. "And I'd like you to lead the new workshop project. Flexible hours, better pay." "You've earned it." He blinked, speechless. Grace stood, extending her hand. "And maybe dinner sometime when it's not snowing?" He chuckled. "I'd like that." That night, Daniel drove home through the same road where the snow had once trapped her. The town lights twinkled in the distance, and Lily's laughter filled the car. He thought about how sometimes life knocks on your door when you least expect it. Cold, desperate, uninvited. And yet, it brings the very thing you'd stopped believing in. Love doesn't always enter with a grand gesture. Sometimes, it shows up in the middle of a storm, asking simply for shelter, and if you're lucky, it stays.